USAID disaster response you just mentioned, a 17-person team. Is that enough? I mean, we're talking about, we've heard you guys talk about the potential of hundreds of thousands of refugees.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's an important point. But what we're trying to do here is provide any incremental update on the status of what our work is. And I'll just note, and you may be fully aware of this, but in terms of humanitarian assistance, we have been the biggest provider of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. We've provided over $52 million in humanitarian assistance to Ukraine in the past year. Over the past few weeks, we've committed additional funding and supplies to humanitarian organizations. There's been a specific need and therefore a focus on support services, food, clean water, hygiene, shelter, trauma, primary health care, and we're prepared to certainly provide a significant amount more. So this is just one step, obviously less than 24 hours after the events of last night, and we will continue to plus up from here. Go ahead.
Jen, there are a number of protests within Russia itself. Are you monitoring this? What's your message to them?
Well, there certainly are, and I know with everything going on, this may not have caught everybody's attention, but let me just note that, today we're seeing Russian people in the streets, open letters from leading Russian journalists and cultural figures denouncing President Putin's war of choice, and reports of Russian mothers concerned about the reckless deployment of their sons to this fratricidal war. I think it's important to remember back in 2014 when they didn't even acknowledge that they were sending Russian soldiers. They didn't even acknowledge when there were body bags coming back from Ukraine into Russia. And there is an outcry in the streets by Russian people, by more Russian people than I think many would expect. So despite Putin's crackdown at home, dissenting views remain, and I think that's important to note. To publicly protest against President Putin and his war is a deeply courageous act. Their actions show the world that despite the Kremlin's propaganda, there are Russian people who profoundly disagree with what he is doing in Ukraine.
And one more. Speaker Pelosi's talking about sending $600 million in lethal aid to Ukraine. Is this something you support?
We are in conversations with Congress, and I mentioned the president spoke with leaders just earlier this afternoon. I don't have an exact number, but those are ongoing conversations about what needs the Ukrainians have on the ground in a variety of categories: security, humanitarian, other economic assistance. Go ahead.
Does the U.S. have any analysis to indicate that there is dissent or division within Putin's government, or is it your understanding that Putin's government is united in this war?
It's an interesting question, and Jamie, without getting into intelligence, which obviously we look at, I mentioned obviously Russians protesting in the streets. That's not exactly what you asked about, but if you watched the meeting the President Putin had with members of his national security team the other day, it was quite striking, the back and forth he had with his intel chief in that meeting. The analysis of that certainly can be done in an open source manner, given it was quite public, but I will leave outside analysis to give further assessment of that.
And as you know, we are seeing Ukrainians start to flee the country.
Yeah.
Is the U.S. prepared to accept Ukrainian refugees?
We are, but we certainly expect that most, if not the majority, will want to go to Europe in neighboring countries. So we are also working with European countries on what the needs are, where there is capacity. Poland, for example, where we are seeing an increasing flow of refugees over the last 24 hours, or flow of individuals, I should say, out of Ukraine, what their needs are, and we've been talking and engaging with Europeans about that for some time now.
Well, part of what you're doing is to prepare for the United States to accept.
The president is certainly prepared for that, but I would just note that because there are a number of European countries neighboring Ukraine who have expressed an openness to it, we would anticipate many of them would want to go to European countries.